Hello there.
Hello there and welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Star Wars Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith. We are going to break down this third chapter of the Skywalker saga in excruciating detail, uncovering 20 years worth of hidden details, deleted scenes, significant script changes, filming and editing goofs, everything you need to know about George Lucas's final Star Wars film. I've seen this movie at least 100 times, probably more, like almost certainly more, and I cannot wait to show you all of the hidden gems that have been hiding in plain sight for the past 2 decades. And in celebration of Revenge of the Sith's 20th anniversary, we also want to share with you some exclusive ScreenCrush merch. We have the Hello There, the High Ground, and lots of other great shirts like Prequel Apologist, Thank You George, Somehow Palpatine Returned, and many, many more up on our merch store right now, ScreenCrushmerch.com. So the title Revenge of the Sith was inspired by the original title for the third film of the original series, Revenge of the Jedi, which was later changed to Return of the Jedi, and there were actually marketing materials released that featured that original title. But George Lucas wound up changing the title because
revenge is not the Jedi way.
But this title really was a perfect title for the film, being that revenge is a key pillar of the Sith. In the first installment of the prequel trilogy, we heard Darth Maul say,
"At last we will have revenge."
The Phantom Menace showed us the early stages of Palpatine's plan to avenge the Sith after having been in hiding for a millennium. And in this film, we are seeing the final pieces of that revenge plot fall into place. So the film opens with Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi and not Jedi Master Anakin Skywalker embarking on a mission to save Chancellor Palpatine from the leader of the droid army, General Grievous, and Dark Lord of the Sith, Count Dooku, a former Jedi and the master of Anakin and Obi-Wan's late master, Qui-Gon Jinn. So this opening shot is a 2-minute straight, no cuts tracking shot, and it goes from full CG into the cockpit of Anakin's fighter, a first of its kind for the saga. Here we can see that Anakin now has a scar on his right eye. Now, Lucas's original intention for this scar was to show Anakin's growth as a Jedi in a war-torn galaxy, and that shows us a physical representation of the hardship and maturity since we last saw him in Attack of the Clones, the beginning of the Clone Wars. Now, in the Dark Horse Star Wars comic, Republic 71, we see Count Dooku's apprentice, Asajj Ventress, give Anakin this scar. However, that comic is not canon, so we still don't have an in-canon confirmation as to how Anakin actually received this scar, but my money is on it definitely being a lightsaber scratch. So here on Obi-Wan's fighter, we can see what looks like confirmed kill markings or victory markings, similar to that of the markings World War II pilots would put on their planes after their battles. And we know from various interviews with George Lucas, as well as his overt references to real-world history in the Star Wars saga and his own World War II movie, Red Tails, that Lucas is a history buff, and he has always intended for Star Wars to mirror that of our own world's history, including ancient history as well as more modern history. Now, Revenge of the Sith is not only a perfect example of Lucas's intentionality of mirroring ancient stories of good and evil from our own history, but our more modern politics as well. Now, it's here in this opening scene of the film where we already begin to see the struggle of Anakin Skywalker and his teetering between the light and the dark, as well as the role that Obi-Wan inadvertently played in pushing Anakin over that edge. There's this scene where Obi-Wan gets swarmed and tells Anakin to go on without him.
"I'm not leaving without you, Master."
And there's this scene where Anakin wants to go back and help his fellow pilots.
"I'm gonna go help them out." No, they are doing their job, then we can do ours.
Now, in both of these scenes, we are seeing Anakin stay true to the values of a Jedi, helping those in need, but his master, in 2 instances, tells him to abandon him and his fellow soldiers to complete the mission at hand. This perfectly represents how Obi-Wan sees things very black and white in his willingness to accept sacrifices, even a sacrifice of himself for the greater good, while Anakin is more emotionally driven, and his heroic nature of wanting to save his master and wanting to save his fellow fighters, that all connects back to his inability to let go of everything that he fears to lose. Anakin was never able to embrace the no attachments element of being a Jedi, and while this arguably made him a better friend and maybe even a better soldier, it also crippled his ability to reject the dark side, which feeds on attachment and passion. Now, throughout this film, Anakin is obsessed with saving Padme and not losing her like he lost Qui-Gon and his mother. He also allows himself to become consumed by his grief and his own aspirations of self-preservation. And these two instances in this early section of the film where Anakin wants to save his fellow fighters but is told not to by his Jedi Master perfectly represents the overarching story of this film, which showcases the Jedi Order pushing Anakin further and further away with their dogmatic views of Stoicism, while Palpatine on the other hand preys on Anakin's lust for power and his love for Padme and his inability to let go of his grief. Obi-Wan says,
"Oh, I have a bad feeling about this."
Now this is a line that is uttered in every Star Wars movie, first by Han Solo here in A New Hope.
I got a bad feeling about this.
Now one thing I love about this line is that the Force is all about your feelings, and the Force surrounds us all, it binds us, it penetrates us, etc. So everyone, a Force user or not, has a connection to that cosmic force and can have
A bad feeling about this.
Now, this opening scene of Revenge of the Sith is big. We get into a space battle. Obi-Wan and Anakin have some elevator mishaps. R2 catches super battle droids on fire. And of course, Anakin and Obi-Wan have their big rematch with Count Dooku. But there was a lot more from this opening act that was left on the cutting room floor, such as Master Shaak Ti, who we first met here in Attack of the Clones, having been captured and killed by General Grievous.
Stinking Jedi.
In that scene, we got this riveting piece of dialogue from Anakin and Obi-Wan.
That was a bad mistake.
You know, I love George Lucas, but he can really put the clunky in McClunky, can't he?
McClunky.
Now, there's also this whole deleted sequence that features Anakin and Obi-Wan treading through water. This is actually still part of the Revenge of the Sith video game, which came out before the movie and actually had a lot of cutscenes from the movie in the game and revealed the entire plot of the film before the film even came out. And there was also this deleted gem.
I sense Count Dooku is above us.
Oh, yes, you're right. Beep is up, I think.
Now, before we move on from Shaak Ti's death, I should go ahead and mention that this wasn't the only version of her death that was filmed for the movie. We also have this deleted scene that featured her being killed by Anakin during Order 66.
What is it, Skywalker?
So Anakin and Obi-Wan enter this throne room, and it is super reminiscent of the Emperor's throne room in the first Star Wars Episode 3, Return of the Jedi. Palpatine swivels around in his chair just like in Jedi, and we see Obi-Wan and Anakin approach the Chancellor just like Vader and Luke would do in Return of the Jedi. Only in Jedi, it was Luke who was shackled, and in this scene, it is Palpatine who is shackled. But this also perfectly parallels how in Return of the Jedi, we were seeing Anakin, or Darth Vader, approach Palpatine in this throne room, and there he was on the path back to the light side, while in this scene in Revenge of the Sith, Anakin is on the path to joining the dark side. So Count Dooku enters the room, and Obi-Wan says,
This time we will do it together.
I was about to say that.
Now, at the time, this was in reference to the last time we, the audience, saw Anakin and Obi-Wan go up against Dooku, that being in Attack of the Clones when Anakin did this.
We'll take him together. You're going slowly on the left.
Taking it now.
No, Anakin, no! No!
So it's clear that when watching the prequel trilogy, you were supposed to view this as the first time Obi-Wan and Anakin have fought Dooku since Episode 2. But as we know from the Clone Wars animated series, the three have many fights between Episodes 2 and 3, making this exchange a little odd in retrospect. Obi-Wan says,
You won't get away this time, Dooku.
a reference to how in Attack of the Clones, Dooku escaped his fight with Yoda by doing this. But I should also be fair and say there are plenty instances in the Clone Wars series where Dooku escapes. So the three go at it, and it becomes clear that Dooku is trying to have a one-on-one with Anakin. Now, the first time Obi-Wan is separated from the duel, we see him go up this separate set of stairs, and he takes down these super battle droids. Palpatine really is committed to the bit here, huh? So once Kenobi rejoins the fight with Dooku, Dooku pretty quickly dismisses him once again so he can have, like I said, some one-on-one time with Anakin, and it becomes clear that Dooku is under the impression that the whole plan here with Palpatine was to set in motion Anakin joining Dooku and Palpatine on the dark side, not Anakin replacing Dooku as Palpatine's apprentice. Oh, and this is kind of a nitpick, but this should have shattered Kenobi's legs, right? Anyway, Dooku says,
You have hate. You have anger.
a callback to these iconic lines from the original trilogy.
Release your anger. Only your hatred can destroy me.
So Anakin disarms Dooku, and we see him catch Dooku's red saber, and we then see him cross Dooku's red saber and his own blue saber at Dooku's throat. This moment, this crossing of the red and blue sabers, is foreshadowing Anakin's turn to the dark side. It's meant to represent the divide that he is feeling between his lighter half and his darker half, and this visual imagery of the blue and the red sabers being before Anakin as he decides between sparing Dooku or killing him, it is reminiscent of the red pill blue pill choice that we have seen in The Matrix. And this visual representation of the choice that Anakin has to make, the red saber path of killing Dooku, breaking from the Jedi way and taking yet another step toward becoming Darth Vader, or the blue saber path of sparing his enemy, going the Jedi way, and of course, we know that he ends up going that darker path. Now, if you look closely after Anakin decapitates Dooku, we can see his head roll, foreshadowing the metaphorical and literal rolling of heads that is to come with Order 66 and the Empire's takeover of the galaxy and the formation of the rebellion, which challenges the Empire's power. Now, that idiom, heads will roll, is often tied to uprisings throughout history, in instances where power is being taken by a tyrannical ruler like the Emperor and the Empire, and throughout history, these tyrants literally beheaded those who dissented from their rule. But it also applies to the uprising of rebellions against those powerful regimes, and it parallels classic story motifs like the beheading of a dragon representing the destruction of evil. And I tell you all of that because Lucas is notorious for being very intentional in his alliterations to classic storytelling motifs, especially with Star Wars being a story of good versus evil, David versus Goliath, knight versus dragon, you get the point. And this isn't our first decapitation, by the way, in Star Wars. We saw Mace Windu behead Jango Fett in the previous film, and later in this movie, we see Yoda behead 2 clone troopers. So Anakin kills Dooku, he strikes him down at the command of Palpatine, mirroring how Palpatine orders Luke to strike him or Vader down in Return of the Jedi, but Luke refuses and stays in the light, while Anakin instead embarks on his journey to the dark side. Now, Anakin uses the Force with a simple gesture of his hand to unlock these shackles, just like Palpatine does when unshackling Luke in Jedi, another visual cue alluding to Anakin being pulled closer and closer to Palpatine and the Sith. Palpatine says,
You did well, Anakin. He was too dangerous to be kept alive.
This same line is later uttered by Mace Windu in his fight with Palpatine, just as Windu is about to kill Palpatine and Anakin insists that he be spared.
He's too dangerous to be left alive.
Anakin says to Windu,
It's not the Jedi way.
which is the same thing he says to Palpatine here.
Yes, but he was an unarmed prisoner. I shouldn't have done that. It's not the Jedi way.
Now, that line about an unarmed prisoner is another reference to later in the film when Windu has disarmed Palpatine and he's about to strike him down. And this contrast between those two scenes and Anakin's regret shows us how aware Anakin is of what it means to be a Jedi and how the Jedi themselves haven't been living up to the strict doctrine that they impose, which is what leads to Anakin heavily questioning the Jedi's way of doing things and believing Palpatine's lie of the Jedi intending to betray him and the Republic. So Palpatine says,
It is only natural. He cut off your arm, and you wanted revenge. It wasn't the first time, Anakin.
Remember what you told me about your mother and the Sand People?
Now, this line from Palpatine is loaded, so let's break it down. First, when he says it, you can actually faintly hear this Tusken Raider scream from that scene in Episode 2 when Anakin slaughtered the Tusken Raiders. So when Palpatine says it's only natural, this ties to later in the film when Palpatine explains that some consider the ways of the Sith to be unnatural.
Unnatural.
And later in the film, Yoda says that death is a natural part of life.
Death is a natural part of life.
Perfectly juxtaposing the Jedi view of death with that of Sidious and the Sith's view of death. So this scene is again setting the stage for this war of ideology between the Jedi and the Sith, and Palpatine reminds us that Anakin's murder of Count Dooku wasn't the first crack in his armor. In the previous film, in Attack of the Clones, we saw Anakin do something, I would argue, even more heinous when he slaughtered the Sand People, including the women and the children. And we learned that this is something that Anakin has actually shared with his friend and mentor Palpatine off screen. And it's clear that Palpatine is using that information that Anakin confided confided in him as a manipulation tactic to pull Anakin closer and closer to him and to the dark side. Now, Palpatine will go on to use Anakin's fear of loss, stemming from the loss of his mother, to make Anakin fear the loss of Padme. And a little later, we're going to talk about Anakin's self-fulfilling prophecy of his nightmares. So as Palpatine and Anakin leave the throne room, Anakin stops to get Obi-Wan. Palpatine tells him to leave him behind, to which Anakin says,
His fate will be the same as ours.
and this is of course true, because Obi-Wan, Anakin, and Palpatine would all go on to die on board the Death Star. Well, that is until
somehow Palpatine returned.
Now, here as these clones and droids are blasting cannons at one another, we can hear the classic Wilhelm scream. This is a scream that you can find in almost every Lucasfilm movie and countless other films and TV shows as well. So Anakin, Palpatine, and Kenobi, who Anakin is carrying on his back, they escape, and we get this awesome and honestly hilarious scene in the elevator when the ship begins to rotate back into position. And I also just really love the eerie nature of seeing Anakin leading this escape with his two masters following, his Jedi Master Kenobi and his soon-to-be Sith Master Palpatine. The comedic timing in this scene is honestly great.
Elevator's not working.
Now, as the ship tilts, we see R2 fall into this giant pile of battle droids, and we can see Obi-Wan's ship actually crash right here. And can we take a second to do a little frame by frame here? Look, as they are sliding down the elevator shaft and Obi-Wan and Anakin throw their grappling hooks, neither of them grab Palpatine. Palpatine, last minute, grabs Obi-Wan's feet and swings in with them into that elevator door opening. Now, of course, this makes sense, knowing that in hindsight, he is a powerful and agile Sith, but it is a little odd that Obi nor Anakin grabbed the Chancellor before they swung out of the elevator shaft, considering they are there on a Chancellor rescue mission. Now, back with R2, when we see his viewfinder pop up out of this pile of battle droids, it is reminiscent of this scene from A New Hope in the trash compactor. So Anakin, Obi-Wan, Palpatine, and R2 are brought before General Grievous, who is actually voiced by the film's sound engineer Matthew Wood. And the incessant coughing of General Grievous is said to have actually been provided by George Lucas. And in the animated Clone Wars series, which is no longer canon, and no, I'm not talking about like the 3D animated one, I'm talking about the 2D animated one, we actually get to see how Grievous gets this cough, following an encounter with Mace Windu when Grievous arrived on Coruscant to abduct the Chancellor. This happens. So Grievous and Anakin have this great exchange.
I was expecting someone with your reputation to be a little older.
General Grievous. You're shorter than I expected.
Confirming that Anakin and Grievous have never met up until this point, and this fact actually became a bit of a thorn in the side of Dave Filoni and the creators of the in-canon 3D animated Clone Wars series that came out after Revenge of the Sith, because the creators needed to make sure that they stayed within continuity and never had Anakin or Grievous cross paths in that series. So here we can see Grievous's guards, the IG-100 Magna Guards, and their design is actually an original concept designed for General Grievous himself.
I could like these if we went with droid.
So we see Grievous add Obi-Wan and Anakin's lightsabers to his collection, and when he pulls his cape back to slide the hilts into these little pockets, we can see another saber resting inside. And this is actually the same hilt as Jedi Master Ki-Adi-Mundi. Now, Mundi is of course back on Coruscant at the time of this scene, and we later see him with his saber getting killed during Order 66 by his own troopers, but as we'll see later in the film, the animators, they reuse the same digital assets of already designed Jedi saber hilts for many of Grievous's sabers throughout the film. And actually on the other side of Grievous's cape, we can actually see more hilts, one being the same hilt that Obi-Wan used in episodes 1 and 2 of the prequels, and this hilt, which actually appears to be the hilt of, you guessed it, Shak-Ti, whose saber Grievous likely took in that deleted scene where he kills her. But it is worth pointing out, if you watch that scene, he is literally waving around Obi-Wan's new hilt from this movie. It's a mess. So as Anakin and Obi-Wan free themselves and the Chancellor, we hear Palpatine sigh in relief as his cuffs are removed. This is the exact same sigh sound that we hear him let out later in the movie, being reused in this scene. So after Grievous escapes, Anakin manages to successfully continue flying half the ship, and he manages
another happy landing.
But what's eerie about this scene is it's anything but a happy landing. Anakin, without realizing it, has stepped into the final chapter of his time as a Jedi, and by the next time this gifted pilot leaves the planet of Coruscant, he will no longer be Anakin Skywalker, but Darth Vader. A Darth Vader who will have just slain hundreds, if not thousands, of Jedi. So throughout the movie, there's a lot of fun little ship Easter eggs, such as here we can see the Millennium Falcon, the ship, of course, of Han Solo from the original trilogy, a ship that at this time wouldn't be owned by Han Solo or even Lando Calrissian. No, at this time, the ship would actually still be owned by the Republic group and called not the Millennium Falcon, but the Stellar Envoy. But we should point out that in this scene, we can see that the Falcon still has this big divide in the tip that we know in canon wouldn't have been there until this happens in the Solo movie.
See if he goes for this.
No, what are you doing? That's the escape pod!
I know. But of course, at the time, that hadn't been established. And hey, there's also a shot later in the film here that we'll go ahead and mention where we can see the NASA space shuttle flying in the background. So as Anakin steps off this transport, Obi-Wan insists that he go have his day with the politicians and revel in his success of defeating Count Dooku. And I think it's kind of clear that Obi-Wan doesn't know that Anakin killed Dooku in cold blood with him being unarmed. Anakin says to Obi-Wan,
Well, you owe me one, and not for saving your skin for the 10th time.
9th time. That business on Cato Nemoidia doesn't count.
Cato Nemoidia being the homeworld of the Nemoidians, which is the same species as Separatist leader Nute Gunray, and this planet, of course, was a prime location of the Clone Wars. Now, there's no in-canon reference to this specific instance that I could find, but in the Revenge of the Sith prequel novel, Labyrinth of Evil, we do see Anakin and Obi-Wan travel to Cato Nemoidia to arrest Nute Gunray, and Anakin ends up having to save Obi-Wan again. So until they tell us something new, I think we can assume that that's the instance that Obi-Wan is referring to. Now, here we can see Palpatine's guards still sporting their blue attire that we first saw in Phantom Menace. These same guards, of course, would later go on to don their reddish-orange robes later in the film, the same robes that they wear in the original trilogy as guards of the Emperor. So when Anakin and Padme embrace in the shadows, which of course symbolizes their secret relationship and its connection to Anakin's fall to the dark side, we can see that Padme's hair is in the classic Princess Leia double bun style, which is fitting considering that this is the scene where Padme reveals to Anakin that she is pregnant.
Something wonderful has happened. Annie, I'm pregnant.
Now, over at their apartment, Padme and Anakin discuss their love for one another.
No, it's because I'm so in love with you.
So love has blinded you?
Well, that's not exactly what I meant.
We can see here that Padme is wearing the necklace that Anakin made and gifted to her in Phantom Menace.
I made this for you. It'll bring you good fortune.
It's beautiful.
And we'll see this necklace again at the end of the film when Padme's body is being laid to rest. So Anakin wakes up from a nightmare of Padme dying during childbirth. He tells Padme that this dream was like that of the ones that he had had about his mother before she died in Attack of the Clones, a dream that did ultimately come true. Now, while we know that Anakin's vision does come true, at this moment, the future is not determined. Anakin allows his own vision, his own dream, to push him toward the dark side, which is ultimately what is responsible for Padme dying during childbirth. So it becomes a which came first, the chicken or the egg type of situation. Anakin is having these dreams because he as a Jedi can see the future, but this future only happens because Anakin allows himself to fulfill the destiny of these dreams by allowing those very dreams to push him to the dark side in hopes of stopping them from coming true. Now, there is a popular fan theory that Palpatine was actually behind Anakin's mother's abduction by the Sand People, and I myself have often wondered if it was Palpatine who placed these visions in Anakin's nightmares about Padme dying during childbirth. We know from a later scene in the film that Palpatine can speak to Anakin through the Force.
If the Jedi destroy me, any chance of saving her will be lost.
So theoretically, he could have also placed dreams within his mind to pull him closer to the dark side. Yoda himself tells Anakin,
"Careful you must be when sensing the future, Anakin. The fear of loss is a path to the dark side."
Now, in this scene, we see Anakin's face again covered in shadow with only his eyes peering out, just like when he dons the mask of Vader and becomes engulfed by a constant shard of darkness that is represented, of course, by the Black Vader suit. And this imagery is later mirrored when we see Anakin's face obscured by the mask as it is lowered onto his head like a cloud moving in front of the sun, casting a shadow. Now, Anakin is late to Obi-Wan's report on the Outer Rim sieges. Obi-Wan catches him up by saying,
Seleucus has fallen, and Master Voss has moved his troops to Bos Pitti.
Master Voss is in reference to Jedi Master Quinlan Voss, who we actually see here in Phantom Menace and who is mentioned again in the Kenobi series as an Order 66 survivor.
Quinlan was here?
Yeah, he helps now and again, smuggling younglings.
And this is despite Voss actually having been killed in this deleted scene from Order 66. So over in Palpatine's office, he and Anakin talk, and Palpatine says,
I need your help, son.
Little choices of dialogue like this perfectly represents the pull that Palpatine has over Anakin by taking advantage of the fact that Anakin grew up without a father, and then had his first father, Qui-Gon Jinn, murdered just as he was getting to know him. So Palpatine calling Anakin his son is honestly the perfect opening line for a scene where he is about to drive a knife into the already giant wedge between Anakin and the Jedi by setting in motion Anakin's denial by the Council of becoming a Jedi Master, setting the path for him to instead become a Sith Master. And it is crazy to see how in this quick series of scenes just how responsible the Jedi are for their own downfall. Mace Windu even says,
It's very dangerous putting them together.
Then motherfucker, why did you have him go spy on Palpatine alone?
What was the reason? What was the reason? What was the reason?
And God, there are just so many more moments in this film where we as the viewer can see the mistakes being made by those around Anakin. Things that we know will push him to the dark side. I swear, I watch this movie every time hoping that something is going to change and Anakin will take a different path. I mean, not only are we seeing Palpatine use his manipulations to turn Anakin against the Jedi, and the Jedi falling right into the trap by pushing Anakin further and further away, but it's also Padme who tries to take advantage of Anakin's relationship with the Chancellor.
Now you're closer to the Chancellor than anyone. Please, ask him to stop the fighting and let diplomacy resume.
Don't ask me to do that.
The same way that the Jedi have. When we see Anakin go to meet with the Chancellor again, this time in an opera house, which by the way was chosen because George Lucas felt that too many of the scenes in the film had already taken place in Palpatine's office. As Anakin makes his way into the opera house, we actually get a cameo from the man himself, George Lucas's first appearance in any Star Wars film. He is also joined by his daughter, Katie Lucas. So this scene with Palps and Anakin may very well be my favorite of any Star Wars movie. Palpatine telling Anakin the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise, his former Sith Master. It's in this speech where Palpatine reveals that his former master had mastered the ability to create life. And the way Palpatine looks at Anakin when he says this, it to me has always heavily implied that Palpatine's intention was to imply that he and Darth Plagueis were responsible for the creation of Anakin Skywalker, who we know was a virgin birth.
Who was his father?
There was no father.
Now, while the canon explanation to Anakin's creation is that he was created by the Force itself as a response to Plagueis and Palpatine's attempts at perverting the Force and shifting it to the dark side, that would still kind of mean that Palpatine and Plagueis' actions were indirectly responsible for the creation of Anakin Skywalker, aka the Chosen One. Now, in the script for Revenge of the Sith, there is a deleted line where Palpatine says to Anakin, I arranged for your conception, you could almost think of me as your father. Now, while Lucas did decide to cut this line, I do feel vindicated in knowing that this idea at least crossed his mind, and I believe that it was the intent behind Palpatine's telling of this story. There's also the fact that before them we are seeing the Squid Lake Mon Calamari ballet performance in which they are attending, which, I mean, come on, that's supposed to look like an egg being fertilized. I mean, it's obvious. This is a giant CGI thing, it's not accidental. So Palpatine then goes on to explain that not only could Plagueis create life, but he could prolong life.
He could even keep the ones he cared about from dying.
Palpatine, of course, knows that this power is of interest to Anakin because he's in his head, and he knows Anakin's fear of losing Padme like he lost his mother, a fear that Palpatine is likely amplifying and placing into his mind. This obsession with eternal life in the physical form is also a key goal of the Sith. Earlier in the film, Yoda says,
"Rejoice for those around you who transform into the Force."
This line from Yoda is the direct antithesis to the Sith and their conquest for eternal life in a fleshly body. Their greed and lust for power and eternal life ties into Palpatine's manipulations of Anakin, who has never been able to follow this key pillar of the Jedi way, not having attachments. Attachments to others and attachments to your physical self and your self-interests. Now over on the planet of Kashyyyk, which was first introduced in the Star Wars Holiday Special as the homeworld to the Wookiees, we see Wookiees swinging from vines Tarzan style, letting out these Tarzan-esque roars. This is a direct callback to this scene from Return of the Jedi with Chewbacca swinging on a vine on Endor. It's also here on Kashyyyk, which looks similar to Endor in some ways, that we see the early versions of what would become the notorious chicken walkers that we would see in Return of the Jedi. So while Yoda embarks to Kashyyyk, Obi-Wan is sent to engage General Grievous on Utapau. But before leaving, we see Anakin and Obi share their final scene together as old friends, as master and apprentice. For the next time the two would meet, Anakin will have become Darth Vader. You'll notice, like many moments in this film, Anakin is engulfed in shadow while Obi-Wan is drenched in light, showing us the two very different paths our two leads of this trilogy were about to take as the Clone Wars reached its bitter end. Anakin goes to visit Padme, and he can feel that Obi-Wan had been there in her apartment.
Obi-Wan's been here, hasn't he?
He came by this morning.
Now, this is in reference to an actual deleted scene from the movie, which was actually still featured here in the comic adaptation of Revenge of the Sith. So in this scene, Obi-Wan says to Padme, "I am not blind, Padme, though I have tried to be for Anakin's sake and for yours. Anakin has loved you since the day you met in that horrible junk shop on Tatooine. He has never even tried to hide it, though we do not speak of it. We pretend that I don't know, and I was happy to because it made him happy. You made him happy when nothing else ever truly could." Now, we actually see an example of Obi-Wan knowing all about Anakin and Padme's relationship here in the final season of the Clone Wars, a season that was intertwined with the events of Revenge of the Sith.
I hope you at least told Padme I said hello.
Now, as great as this scene is, I am kind of glad that it was cut because it makes this scene later in the movie even better, if you ask me, when Obi-Wan says,
"Anakin is the father, isn't he?"
That being the moment when it's confirmed to us as the audience that Obi-Wan has known the whole time, even though we already knew. It was just really well done. So I think they made the right choice by deleting that scene and having that be the moment where it was like confirmed that he's known. And it gives it even more of a punch because we're put in this situation where Anakin is feeling like betrayed by Obi-Wan, but we get the context and reminder that no, Obi-Wan has known that Anakin has been like doing stuff he's not supposed to do, but out of his love for Anakin, he has let it slide. And you know, that willingness to take out scenes, you know, say what you will about George Lucas's directing style.
I don't like sand.
I will say that that is a strength of his. He is really good at taking out scenes that are too on the nose, and I'm glad that they removed all of the stuff that heavily suggested like that Anakin thought there was something romantic going on between Obi-Wan and Padme, and instead they reworked it to be not a romantic betrayal, but a loyalty betrayal, showing us that dichotomy of Anakin and Palpatine versus the Jedi and what's known as the Loyalist faction of the Senate, a faction that Padme was a part of that had become skeptical of the direction Palpatine was taking the Republic, consisting of characters like Padme, Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and this is an organization that would go on to become the Rebellion. There are even some deleted scenes from this movie featuring secret meetings amongst this early rebellion.
We are hoping to form an alliance in the Senate to stop the Chancellor from further subverting the Constitution.
Now, this was actually the first time that actress Genevieve O'Reilly portrayed the character of Mon Mothma, but she continued to play the character masterfully in shows like Andor, as well as the Clone Wars, Rebels, and Ahsoka. Now on Utapau, we can see these giant bones of a dead Rahua whale. I'm pretty sure I'm not saying that right. I apologize. It's a native creature to the planet of Utapau, and using these bones to create their architecture was known as Ossic architecture on the planet. So as Obi-Wan drops down from these rafters to confront General Grievous, he says his classic catchphrase,
"Hello there."
Now, this is in reference to the first line spoken by Obi-Wan in A New Hope.
"Hello there."
However, we learn in the Clone Wars that canonically, Obi-Wan is referencing this moment from another encounter with Grievous.
"Hello there."
And I love this little moment here when Grievous is popping out his extra arms and sabers, and we can see this battle droid nudge his buddy to watch. Now, like I mentioned earlier, the visual effects team did a brilliant and groundbreaking job on this movie, especially for a 2005 movie. But one area where they did skimp a little were the hilt diversities amongst General Grievous's collection. Here we can see him using Anakin's saber, and here we can see him using Obi-Wan's saber, but we have different colored lasers coming out of the hilts. Now, back over on Coruscant, here in Palpatine's office, we can see him looking at a holographic screen featuring the Death Star plans. You'll notice that these plans are in red, just like the hologram of the Death Star that we saw in possession of Count Dooku in Attack of the Clones. We can also see what looks like the Death Star as a part of this design on the furniture in Palp's office. So as Anakin and Palpatine talk, we see them walk past this giant portrait in the hall. This relief is known as both the Great Hyperspace War as well as the Great Sith Wars. This relief depicts the last great war between the Jedi and the Sith. Now, as Jedi guests would visit Chancellor Palpatine's office, they assumed that this relief depicted a great victory for the Jedi, but it was actually Palpatine's own way of providing a tribute to the Sith. Now, it is in this scene that Palpatine does finally reveal himself to Anakin as the Dark Lord of the Sith that has orchestrated this entire war.
You're the Sith Lord.
This is also the scene in which that moment that I mentioned earlier took place, where Palpatine was going to reveal to Anakin that he was responsible for his birth, but Lucas felt it was too similar to Vader's reveal to Luke that he was his father in Empire Strikes Back. Now, if you ask me, it would have been like poetry had they kept that in.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
But like I was saying a little earlier, I do appreciate them keeping it a little bit more ambiguous instead of having it be so on the nose. It's also here that we can see Palpatine doing this gripping motion with his hand down by his side, as if he is prepping to draw his own saber to defend himself if Anakin did try to strike him down, just like he draws it here and here later in the film. Now, back on Utapau, in the high-speed chase between Grievous and Kenobi, we can see a clone trooper doing what I can only describe as straight-up boxing with a battle droid. It's also here on Utapau that we see Commander Cody in action, of course played by Tamura Morrison, the face of Jango Fett, the Clone Army, and now even Boba Fett. Now, the name Commander Cody actually comes from one of the mini serials that inspired George Lucas to create Star Wars, Commander Cody being the name of one of those mini serials. After Obi-Wan defeats Grievous with his own blaster, he says,
"So uncivilized."
This is a callback to Obi-Wan's description of the lightsaber to Luke in A New Hope.
Elegant weapon for a more civilized age.
So when Anakin arrives to inform Master Windu of Palpatine revealing himself to be the Sith Lord, we see Mace take Master Kit Fisto, CSE-10, and Agan Kolar to confront the Dark Lord. And this is a formidable collection of Jedi Masters, but they are still no match for Darth Sidious. As they arrive, we see Palpatine spin around in his swivel chair just like in Return of the Jedi. As Palpatine stands, he says,
"It's treason, then."
A reminder that Palpatine will be characterizing the Jedi's attack as a form of treason when, in reality, it's Palpatine who has committed treason by playing both sides of the war. Palpatine draws his saber and does the spinny jump accompanied by what is called a Force Scream, and apparently this Sith tactic is responsible for these Jedi Masters being caught so off guard and easily slain by Sidious. Ten and Kolar didn't even get a single saber clash in. Kit Fisto got in a couple, but after a matter of seconds, it was only Master Windu who was able to go one-on-one with Sidious, but it's been popularly theorized that Palpatine let Windu last as long as he did as part of his plan to turn Anakin to the dark side. That's right, some people think that Palpatine was merely toying with Windu during this battle and ultimately allowed Windu to defeat him and pin him down in that windowsill because he could feel Anakin approaching, and he wanted to use this moment to convince Anakin that the Jedi were plotting to take over.
I told you it would come to this. I was right. The Jedi are taking over!
Actually, during their fight, there's even a scene where Palpatine has his saber right up to Windu's chest, and he seems to just not kill him. Like, he's like, I gotta wait. And you'll also notice throughout this fight that there are several instances where Palpatine is clearly animated due to Ian McDiarmid not being able to do some of the required Sith moves that the script called for. I mean, come on, we can't all be Ray Park.
A master swordsman, I ain't.
So originally Anakin was supposed to be present for the entirety of this fight. If you look closely right here, you can even see that Palpatine's lightsaber hilt is different. It's actually Anakin's lightsaber hilt. And this is because originally Anakin was present for the duel between Palpatine and Windu. And Palpatine didn't actually use his own lightsaber in this original version of the scene. In the original version, he force grabs Anakin's lightsaber and uses it to fight Mace Windu. Now, this was of course changed, but they still used some of the footage that was shot from that version of the duel. And that's why we see Anakin's hilt in this scene. And fun fact for you, a lot of the toys for Revenge of the Sith were already in production based upon that original version of the script. And a few, and I do mean a few, of these bad boys were released into the wild. So this toy of Palpatine was wide released. It's him with a red saber, but with Anakin's hilt. They changed the color of the saber to match the change in the script, but some versions of this toy did slip through the cracks that have the blue saber, and they are mixed in with all of the red versions. And I was actually lucky enough to have just ordered this one a few years back, anticipating that I'd get the one with the red saber. That's what I was looking for. And I'll admit that when I got it in the mail, I was like, why is his lightsaber blue? Do I have a misprint here? And then I was like, oh my god, wait a second. I've got a gem on my hands. So anyway, Anakin rolls in. Windu has walked right into Palpatine's trap. Palpatine lets out this burst of lightning, showing Anakin his true power, and in the process, scarring himself and revealing his true self, the evil face that had been hiding behind the face of a humble senator of Naboo. Anakin begs Windu not to kill Palpatine and reminds him that it is not the Jedi way, alluding back to his own regrets of killing Dooku when he was unarmed. Anakin then cuts off Windu's hand, and Palpatine force shocks him out the window. Out the window! Out the window? No? Alright, and right before doing so, we see Palpatine flash a quick little grin, confirming that this has all gone according to plan. Palpatine pushed the Jedi to the point of feeling that they had no choice but to overthrow him and temporarily take control of the Senate, walking right into the trap of Palpatine's accusation that the Jedi wanted to take over. Palpatine even has the nerve to say,
I believe you are the only Jedi with no knowledge of this plot.
So he then sends Anakin to the Jedi Temple along with the 501st Legion of clone troopers to annihilate the Jedi in the temple, claiming that this will give Anakin the strength he needs to save Padme. When in reality, Palpatine is simply using Anakin, or should I say Vader now, the same way that he has always used him. So after sending Anakin to the temple, Palpatine sends a message out across the galaxy to all clone troopers, activating a command called Order 66, which will trigger the chip with inside every clone trooper and make them commit a mass extermination of all Jedi. This was of course further explored in the Clone Wars. So we see multiple Jedi around the galaxy slaughtered by their own troops. Actor Silas Carson, who plays Katie Mundi, actually dies twice during this sequence because he also plays Newt Gunray, who Anakin later kills at the Emperor's command on Mustafar. But this was actually his third Star Wars death overall, as he played the pilot in Phantom Menace, which was killed here in the hangar of the Trade Federation ship. Now, at the temple, we see Anakin kill even the younglings, and according to the young man who played the Jedi youngling here, Hayden Christensen actually said boo when igniting his lightsaber to elicit their jumpy reaction. Now, right before Anakin slaughters these younglings, we see a tear in his eye, and we see this tear shown again once Anakin arrives on Mustafar, which is meant to resemble hell and Anakin's descent into hell as he's made a deal with the devil. And this tear in Anakin's eye is reminiscent of this classic portrait featuring Lucifer, the fallen angel, aka Satan, crying. So Anakin Skywalker is a direct parallel to the character of Lucifer. Lucifer was God's most perfect angel, similar to that of Anakin being the Jedi's chosen one. But Lucifer, like Anakin, would go on to get too big for his britches and betray God, aka Anakin betraying the Jedi, and he would transform into Darth Vader, aka Satan. Now, during Order 66, we see this little badass take on some clone troopers on his own, and this young Jedi is actually being played by George Lucas's son, Jet Lucas. So as Anakin departs from the Jedi Temple, he stops by to check in on Padme. Now, in the movie, we get this brief exchange between 3PO and R2.
Well, he is under a lot of stress, I think.
But in the novelization of the film, there's actually a scene where 3PO pretty much asks R2 what the hell is going on with Anakin, to which R2 says he doesn't know and that Anakin doesn't talk to him anymore. Which is just heartbreaking because these two were so close, and we know that R2 is smart enough to know what's going on, and he is aware of the atrocities that Anakin is committing. So Obi-Wan and Yoda link up after both escape their attacking troops on their respective planets of Kashyyyk and Utapau. We get this badass scene of Obi-Wan and Yoda fighting troopers this outside of the Jedi Temple, but there is also a deleted scene where these clones are actually like trying to pretend to be Jedi.
You clones make terrible Jedi.
So as Obi-Wan and Yoda enter the temple and look upon the slain Jedi, they find security recordings confirming Anakin to be the one responsible. It is also in this recording that we can actually see stunt coordinator and lightsaber combat enthusiast Nick Gillard portraying one of the Jedi slain by Anakin. So Palpatine addresses the Senate, claiming the Jedi attempted to overthrow and kill him, and he proclaims that the Republic shall be reorganized into a galactic empire. The Senate breaks into thunderous applause, to which Padme says,
So this is how liberty dies, with thunderous applause.
And you'll notice that she is wearing a headpiece that is the symbol of the forthcoming Rebel Alliance. So Obi-Wan goes to Padme and tries to get an idea of where Anakin has gone, and she understandably won't tell him. Obi-Wan then stows away in her ship when she goes to find Anakin, and when the two arrive together, Anakin takes Obi-Wan's presence as confirmation that Padme has betrayed him and sided with the Jedi. This is when we see Vader use his signature Force choke for the first time. Well, that is until the Clone Wars animated series came out and we saw Anakin actually use it prior to the events of Revenge of the Sith. So the fight between Master and Apprentice ensues. Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen trained for 2 months choreographing and training for this fight. And oh my god, it's one of the best Star Wars fights ever. I know some people say it's a little too much, and sure, it's a little much, but I'm there for a little much. I mean, this is Anakin Skywalker versus Obi-Wan Kenobi. It needs to be a little much. So I've watched this fight like a million times. Like I've seen the movie many times, but also I've just like watched the fight on YouTube God knows how many times. And if you look closely at this one little part of the duel, we can actually see that Obi-Wan is holding Anakin's saber. This is because in a deleted sequence, we actually saw the two swap lightsabers. So what is so great about this fight is getting to see Anakin and Obi-Wan at the height of their respective powers going toe-to-toe with one another, and George Lucas made sure to convey equal footing of power between the dark and the light, with this scene of the two force pushing against one another. Now, like I mentioned earlier, Mustafar is meant to represent hell, and here we are seeing the battle between good and evil take place in the depths of hell, perfectly symbolizing the historical motifs that Lucas based Star Wars on, having said many times that this is a story about good versus evil. Now, this Hellfire planet of Mustafar features real volcanic explosions from Mount Etna in Italy, which happened to be erupting at the time of production. Now, in the midst of the fight, Obi-Wan concedes that he has failed Anakin, meaning that he has failed as a master and failed in his promise to Qui-Gon all those years ago, showing us that Obi-Wan feels the weight of Anakin's turn. Anakin exclaims that he should have known the Jedi were plotting to take over, to which Obi-Wan doesn't actually deny. He just justifies the Jedi's decision by pointing out that Palpatine is evil, to which Anakin says,
From my point of view, the Jedi are evil!
Now, putting aside Anakin's polite but out-of-place debate rhetoric in the midst of this battle to the death, the use of the phrase point of view is actually common in Star Wars. It's Obi-Wan, after all, who would hide from Luke that his father was Darth Vader, but he would later deny having lied to Luke by stating that what he told him was true
from a certain point of view.
It's also here a little earlier in the film where Palpatine says,
Good as a point of view, Anakin.
So anyway, Obi-Wan leaps onto this hillside, taking the high ground.
I have the high ground! You underestimate my power! Don't try it!
Now, when Obi-Wan speaks of the high ground, this is reminiscent of his first duel with a Lord of the Sith, Darth Maul. Maul had the high ground, but Obi-Wan took a leap of faith, and it proved successful. And this experience taught Obi-Wan not to underestimate his opponent the way Maul underestimated him. So when Obi-Wan is saying, don't try it, he's practically begging Anakin not to make him do what he has come to Mustafar to do, which is destroy the Sith. So this is kind of a little bit of headcanon for me, but I think we can safely assume that Anakin has heard the story of how Kenobi defeated Maul, and Obi-Wan's successful maneuver may have inspired Anakin to prove to his older master that he too could perform this move successfully, and showed that he is just as skilled a warrior as Obi-Wan, falling into that theme of Anakin always feeling the need to prove himself.
You're a great warrior, Anakin, but your need to prove yourself is your undoing.
So Obi-Wan reluctantly takes Anakin's legs and remaining arm, and we see Anakin roll down close to the Lakes of Fire, where he soon catches flame. Now, in the novelization for Return of the Jedi back in '83, we are told that Darth Vader actually fell into a pool of lava, and there's even a toy set from Revenge of the Sith that suggests that Lucas may have had the intention of recreating that moment in the film. In this toy set, they had this little pool of lava that would flip around, so if you drop the Anakin action figure in, the little trap door would spin around and you would see this hand coming up out of the lava. So when Obi-Wan leaves, he takes Anakin's saber with him. We of course know that he will one day pass this saber on to Luke. Obi-Wan, our R2 and 3PO depart the planet with an unconscious Padme. Padme says that there is still good in Anakin, and she's actually right, because Luke will too feel that light many years later in Return of the Jedi, when he ultimately brings Anakin back.
There is still good in him.
So during this epic battle that took place on Mustafar, we were also getting intercuts of another battle of the century between Yoda and Palpatine.
I have waited a long time for this moment.
Now, this fight between Yoda and Palps is iconic. I love Yoda dropping these guards upon entry, and I love just how cocky and badass Yoda is in this moment.
You survived.
Surprised?
Your arrogance blinds you, Master Yoda.
Now, this line is so freaking eerie because, yes, it was the arrogance and the hubris of the Jedi Order that led to them not being able to sense the Sith Lord hiding right under their nose. They were indeed blinded by the dark side. And that is why the Jedi couldn't sense the reemergence of the Sith and said silly stuff like this.
I do not believe the Sith could have returned without us knowing.
Yoda and Palpatine's battle ends in a draw, and Yoda goes into hiding, and in a deleted scene, we actually see him take his pod to Dagobah, which is where we first meet the old Jedi Master in Empire Strikes Back. Now, when Palpatine arrives on Mustafar and finds Anakin's charred body, he places his hand on his head, just like when Obi-Wan finds Luke unconscious in A New Hope, and he places his hand on his head, seemingly using the Force to wake him up, whereas Palpatine is likely using the Force to put Anakin to sleep. In Vader's surgery room, where he is being placed into his mechanized suit, we can see beneath him the Imperial roundel. And if you listen closely, you can hear Anakin's heartbeat right up until the moment that his mask is lowered onto him for the first time, symbolizing Anakin's full transformation into Darth Vader and becoming more machine now than man. Us hearing that heartbeat stop the second the mask closes is symbolizing the complete finished death of Anakin Skywalker. That is until Return of the Jedi, when Luke brings him back. During this scene, we also hear the same score begin to play that we heard at Qui-Gon Jinn's funeral.
Lord Vader, can you hear me?
Using this same music symbolizes how Qui-Gon's death was the turning point for Anakin, the point in which Anakin was destined to become Darth Vader. The Jedi Council, nor even Obi-Wan, saw the potential in Anakin that Qui-Gon saw. Obi-Wan and the Jedi didn't believe in Anakin, they feared him, and Qui-Gon's death by the hand of Sidious's first apprentice doomed Anakin to this grueling fate where Chancellor Palpatine would step in and fill the role of a father that Qui-Gon left behind, a void that Obi-Wan nor Yoda ever attempted to fill. Now, speaking of Qui-Gon, Liam Neeson did return to provide these lines in this deleted scene.
Yoda, my old friend, you have come at last.
Now, in the primary cut of the film, we don't actually hear that dialogue, we just see Yoda meditating and waking from his communing with Qui-Gon. But that scene of him meditating is confirmed to be the moment in which he was communicating with Qui-Gon, and it sets the stage for the scene where Yoda tells Obi-Wan that he will teach him to talk to Qui-Gon in his solitude on Tatooine. So Padme, she lost the will to live, and she passed away following the birth of Luke and Leia, and Anakin has fulfilled his own vision of the future. So when Vader asks about Padme, Palpatine says,
It seems in your anger, you killed her.
So Palpatine is making it out like Anakin's Force choke killed her, but as Vader says,
she was alive. I felt it.
So it's possible Padme really did have a Shakespearean death of a broken heart. I mean, that kind of trauma that Anakin has put her through, mixed with the trauma of childbirth, could certainly be fatal. But it has been theorized that Palpatine actually played a hand in killing Padme through the Force, kind of an inverse of influencing the midichlorians to create life to instead take life, preying on her trauma and sending dark energy her way, making her lose her will to live. One, so she wouldn't be a thorn in the side of Palpatine's plans for the Empire and Vader, but also so that he could take Vader to another level of hate and anger, making him an even stronger Sith Lord and an even stronger weapon for Palpatine to use in his conquest of the galaxy. Now, in early versions of the film, Padme survived and would go into hiding with Leia on Alderaan, and this would have matched up better with this line from Leia in Return of the Jedi.
Do you remember your mother? Your real mother?
Just a little bit. She died when I was very young.
Lucas, however, opted to go ahead and have her die in this movie because she was dead come the original trilogy, and he didn't want her death to take place off screen. Now, here on board the Tantive IV, we can see the same actor who played Boba Fett in the original trilogy, Jeremy Bulloch, now playing Captain Colton, the Tantive IV pilot.
Colton, come say hi!
3PO and R2 are on board the Tantum 4. Bail Organa is leaving them in the custody of Captain Ramus Antilles, the same character who would go on to be choked out by Darth Vader aboard this same ship 19 years later in A New Hope. And of course they threw in this little line about 3PO having his mind wiped.
Have the protocol droid's mind wiped.
What? And that, of course, was to avoid breaking canon, because in the original trilogy, 3PO didn't know Kenobi, he didn't know the Skywalkers, so they had to have his mind wiped. Now, 3PO's "oh no" are actually the final words spoken in this film.
Oh no.
And that's fitting because he has the first line of the following film in A New Hope.
Did you hear that?
At Padme's funeral on her homeworld of Naboo, we see her holding the necklace Anakin gave her in Phantom Menace, and we can see that they have made her appear as if she is still pregnant as part of their plan to hide the twins from the Empire. It is also here on Naboo that we see Padme's successor as Queen of Naboo. We also see the governor of Naboo. We get Jar Jar Binks, Boss Nass, as well as Padme's family, who we actually met in these deleted scenes from Attack of the Clones. Here on board an early version of a Star Destroyer, we see Palpatine joined by Vader, and right here we can see Grand Moff Tarkin being portrayed by a different actor, unlike in Rogue One where they digitally recreate Peter Cushing. It's also here that we hear this classic TIE Fighter sound effect for the first time in the prequel trilogy. Leia is taken with Bail to Alderaan, where she meets her adoptive mother for the first time, and Luke is taken by Obi-Wan to live with his aunt and uncle. You'll remember Joel Edgerton and Bonnie Piesse played Owen and Beru in Attack of the Clones. They are the son and daughter-in-law of Clea Galars, the husband of Anakin's mother, Shmi. Owen and Beru then hold Luke and look out at the twin sons of Tatooine, setting the stage for A New Hope. My friends, I love this movie, flaws and all, and I want to thank you so much for joining me for this 20 years later breakdown of the film. I remember seeing this movie in theaters when I was like 7 years old, and to this day, it is still my favorite Star Wars movie. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's the best Star Wars movie, but it's definitely my favorite, and breaking it down with all of you has been a personal career highlight for me. Thank you so much for joining me on this ride. Again, be sure to check out our Revenge of the Sith inspired parody merch up on ScreenCrushMerch.com. And if you're new here, please do feel free to subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.